greenback, the US dollar, nearly 13 Rand to the dollar in 14 years. Now, we are on Skype. We have the Chief Executive Officer of Kaon Capital, Brigid Taylor. Very good morning to you, Brigid. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Brigid, before we talk about the outcomes, why is the Rand taking such a beating at the moment?
Well, I think we've been punished a little bit. I mean, we've had quite a lot of negative data, and if you look at what's happening globally with regards to the dollar's quite strong, the oil prices come off, we've seen commodity prices come off, and even our stock market. I mean, we're seeing the South African stock market very, very mixed. The global picture around growth is quite negative, and in South Africa, we've got a lot of fundamental issues. So when we talk about fundamentals, we're talking about things like you know, it's expensive to employ people. It's expensive to buy electricity. We're not always sure that the electricity is going to be on. We're not sure about whether or not our officials in politics are corrupt or not, where the money's going, etc. So all of these types of messages are negative for foreign investors. And that really means that people take their money out of South Africa and they put it into other places, which unfortunately means that the Rand weakens.
Now, Brigid, I read this morning that this time round, let's call it it's not such a big problem for policymakers in South Africa. Do you share that view?
Look, I'm not sure that I do share that view. I think that I feel like we're a frog in boiling water. In other words, you know, when it's warm, it starts to get a little bit hotter, and we don't really pay any attention to that. And it's starting to get quite hot now. And are we going to get to a stage where we can't jump out of the hot pot anymore? Or are we going to continue along the same path? I mean, as you mentioned earlier, the Rand's currently trading at levels that we haven't seen in 14 years. And that should tell you that we've got to pay attention to the fact that there's trouble brewing. We need those foreign investors. We need to see people investing money for the long term in the South African market with regards to business, etc. And I am concerned that policymakers are not necessarily paying enough attention to that, specifically in an environment where it's only getting worse, it's not getting better. You know, if we look at the likes of the United States who are coming back online, they're starting to see some growth. We look at the UK, they're starting to see some growth. Even the Eurozone, who we all are concerned about, are in fact starting to see some growth. Yet in South Africa, and we're part of Africa, which is one of the most robust continents, we've got very, very slow growth, and that's going to affect everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you live in a township, whether you live in a big house in Sandhurst, it affects everybody, and that includes the politicians. So it does concern me that there's not enough emphasis being placed on this, and we sort of wipe it under the carpet and hope it'll go away.
Within that context, what do you think will be the direct effect it will have on inflation here in South Africa?
Well, I mean, at some point it's going to impact the price that you pay for food. So a lot of food we import, which means that instead of paying 11 Rand for a dollar when you're buying a ton of maize or you're buying a ton of goods, whatever those are, you're suddenly paying 13 Rand. So that effectively what happens is that the guys that are producing these will then start to have to charge you more for that. So whether that's milli-meal, whether that's petrol, whether that's goods that you buy, be they furniture, be they clothing, all of those things start to cost a lot more. And because of that, inflation starts to pick up. And effectively what that means is you have less money to spend, even though you're earning the same amount of money. It just means your money goes a lot less. You know, you can buy less for a Rand.
And what are the investors saying right now?
Well, I think investors, I mean, if we look at just the South African market, South African investors by and large are very, very cautious. We talk about it in the financial markets and say that the market's long cash, which means that they're sitting on big savings and they're not really investing that money, which means that they're concerned about what they're likely to get back in terms of their money. The big concern, though, is that we're not seeing foreign investors coming into South Africa because of the various issues that we have, which I mentioned earlier. You know, they rather go and invest their money in Kenya or invest it in Ghana or Zambia because there's better growth there. And we really do need to change that sort of perception of South Africa to attract those types of flows and to encourage the local companies to invest more money and not to sit on their cash and savings.
And what do we need to do next? Do we need the government to intervene, or do we need to leave the markets to kind of correct itself?
Well, we always say markets never lie because you've got buyers and sellers. You've always got two sides of the equation. So because of that, markets correct themselves. But what the market is telling you is that we're in trouble. We're trading at very low levels, which means that the market's not happy with what's happening in South Africa. And that's not a South African view only, that's a global view. From a political perspective or from a business perspective, I think, one of the big things that's missing in South Africa is that partnership between business and government and trust being placed, where business really does trust government, government trusts business, because together there's more employment created, there's more investment created, there's more opportunity created, and everybody wins. But, it does require putting your pride in your pockets, sitting down around a table and negotiating around the best way forward, and doing that in an environment where you can be trusted, where you're not being perceived to be corrupt or to have an ill agenda, where you're doing things that only benefit you. This has to benefit the whole country, because if everybody wins and if the government gets involved with business, what ultimately means is that government wins because they create better opportunities for the people, and business wins because there's more people that want to purchase their products.
Brigid, thank you for that contribution this morning. That's the Chief Executive Officer of Kaon Capital, Brigid Taylor, giving us her views on why the rand is taking such a beating international markets. Of course, today Reva Steenkamp would have celebrated her 32nd birthday. Her parents issued a statement saying, well, they're still struggling to come to terms with their loss. Of course, Oscar Pistorius will be released under correctional supervision.